All right, so it's a big weekend in Serie A coming up. We know Juve's playing Lazio, Atalanta, Fiorentina, but there's no bigger one on the slate than Saturday, noon Eastern time. It's the Derby della Madonnina, Inter against Milan, and it doesn't get much bigger than this in terms of an early season matchup when you consider that both teams are 3 wins in 3 matches. Only two perfect records through 3 match days in Serie A so far. And for this one, Scotty and I have two special guests. We have Martino Puccio of The Athletic and Alex Raffa of the Interviews podcast. We brought on each side of the San Siro to talk this one. So, guys, how are you doing tonight?
Doing well. Thank you for having me on. It's I think the storyline coming into this Serie A season was obviously the second star, right? Which team is in Milan is going to be able to get there, and obviously the season has started well for both clubs, so it only increases that excitement factor for this weekend.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on again. I think this is my second or third time. And I know your name is Steve this time
Yeah.
because I kept calling you by Sam because I kind of subconsciously knew your brother. It was like the most bizarre thing in the world. So I kept calling you Sam, but that's not the case. It's been great. Too bad Nick isn't here. I had him on for the Serie A preview, so we've already pretty much discussed a lot of what some of the favorites were and how Inter were kind of a big favorite coming in. I don't know, relative to the other teams, I guess you could say. So yeah, it's been fascinating to see the first 3 games. I'm excited.
Yeah, I got a good chuckle when you called me Sam. It was actually an episode you were on, I wasn't, for the World Cup, and I listened to it, and I was like, "That's great." And I was like, and then we found out you do know my brother a little bit, so that's like it kind of made a little more sense after because I was like, Sam of all names, but yeah, you do. So funny stuff. Um, I mean, we'll kick right into it. Inter's the designated home side for this one. Usually doesn't make much of a difference though because these derbies they get fans from both sides. Um, I mentioned two teams, perfect record so far, 3-0. Both teams have scored 8 times in 3 matches, so their scoring record's been pretty impressive so far as well. Milan's coming off a 2-1 win over Roma at the Stadio Olimpico prior to the international break. And Inter, was it 3-0 over Fiorentina, Alex? I know they hammered Fiorentina. Was it four?
It was four.
Four.
It was four. First
So
time they had done that in since like 1965, so it was a big win.
yeah, and Inter yet to concede. That's even more impressive, I think, is 3 matches without conceding a goal. So I'll go to Alex first, since you guys are the home side. What has been most impressive for you as an Inter fan coming in? I don't know if you expect it to be this good, but what's impressed you so far with your side?
Well, if you look at the starting 11 this year compared to last year, there's not a lot of turnover, despite the fact that there's been a lot of turnover in the squad itself. There's not been a lot of turnover in the starting 11, except for two really key positions. The first being in goal. Jan Sommer is there after an amazing season from Andre Onana last year that saw him get a move to Manchester United. And then, of course, Marcus Thuram in the place of Dzeko/Lukaku. So those are, even though there's not a lot of turnover in the starting 11, those are two pretty big positions to be filling with guys who did a great job last year. So I think the most impressive thing has been just how well the side have looked despite losing some really, really key players over the summer. Inzaghi is obviously a system coach, right, with this 3-5-2. So this being the third year of this squad going through the tactics and playing in the system, you can see that they know it like the back of their hand, and it this squad is really built for Simone now. And we're seeing the fruits of his labor. Obviously, the 8 goals this year, only one coming from penalties, which I'm sure Martino will talk a little bit. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then the defense has been stellar. So it's been a good start. I think every Inter fan is a little on edge because of how good it's been, right? You're sort of waiting for the other shoe to drop. And obviously with this weekend having the biggest game, one of the biggest games of the year, already so early in the season, it's an exciting time, but it's also a bit of a nerve-wracking time.
Yeah, and what about on the black and red side, Martino? What's impressed you?
Um, hmm. Let's say, probably being relatively healthy going into the first match of the season, I guess. And already this is probably the biggest talking point of them heading into this match. But overall, like Alex was talking about continuity, Milan changed up formations. They went 4-3-3. So it was a big change with that. Tonali obviously getting swapped out. There's a lot more depth in that area. I wouldn't say anyone that we signed just yet is better than him, but I mean, what we've seen through Loftus-Cheek and Reinders already, it's at least going to be near that level. And if you get two of those guys as opposed to just one, because they never properly replaced Kessie last year. So that was like such a big deal. And this was a team that was lucky enough to scrape on by. And then the added attacking depth. I mean, Pulisic already scored. I assume we're all American here, so he's all our guy in some form. But I mean, it was just great to kind of see that get off on the right foot with the new signings because of what happened last year's summer. Was a disaster, probably one of the worst that you could remember transfer market wise. I know like Inter sold off players. It was a completely different situation when they won the title, but for Milan, it was kind of trying to add to what they had, and you couldn't get more goose eggs if you tried. So yeah, I mean, I'm just fascinated to see how the defense holds up, because that was the biggest question mark, and we've kind of already see some red flags heading into this game.
Yeah, let's stick with Milan for a second. You guys both mentioned transfers. That's something I want to ask you about. Milan's transfer market was heavily scrutinized early on by the Tifosi, especially when Tonali was sold to Newcastle for big money, but they brought in a ton of players. You already mentioned Pulisic and Loftus-Cheek, and I'm not going to probably pronounce his name right, but how do you pronounce his name?
Just say Reinders. It's just
Reinders.
very easy. You just
Okay.
Yeah.
So like what have you made of the new signings so far? You guys brought in a lot of players in the end.
Yeah, I mean, they're more dynamic box to box type midfielders. They're not the traditional double pivot that everybody kind of thought they were heading towards. I mean, Loftus-Cheek is already one of physically the biggest midfielders in the league, and how he's just been able to bounce off of, or players bounce off of him, excuse me. The physicality of both of these guys has been very impressive, especially when you consider guys like Pobega that I mean, it's not to insult the guy. He looks like he runs with Timberlands on. So he's very slow. It doesn't work for kind of the modern game or what Milan's looking for. But yeah, it's really kind of waiting to see when Chukwueze gets his opportunities, because that's a guy they paid 20 plus million for. But Pulisic, like, it's instant success. I mean, we saw it preseason tours, so can't really go off of too much, but the Serie A impact out of what we all know is his weakest position out of the front three spots that he plays in, to just produce right away in a league that's always difficult to score in or create has been great to see. And it's really kind of a little bit paranoia with health, because that's been the number one issue. And obviously as a Jets fan this week, that's like been like, it's all I can think about. It's just, it's just okay, yeah. So like, I was very hyped, just really quick, because I know it's a betting show. I put $100 down on the Jets to win plus 1,500 Super Bowl, because I was just very hyped for it. I was with the positive vibes. I'm usually a pessimist, if you follow me at this point. But yeah, I mean, him snapping the Achilles immediately was just, but that's just what I was worried about going into this break. Olivier Giroud, he's 36. I hope to see some sort of, rotation at the striker position where we see Noah Okafor, but the matches they've gotten in have been strange. You're up 4-1, 4-0 against Torino. You're coming on, you're pretty much seeing out the match. Then with the Roma one, you're down a man at the Olympico, Steve, like, obviously, like, sorry about that, but like, like, there wasn't kind of much to see in terms of attacking progress, because they're trying to hold on to the ball. It's a 1-goal league. Spinazzola was cooking Calabria all of the second half. He looked like he did pre-Achilles. I know that's kind of funny how that got brought up again, but yeah, it's just kind of worrisome in the central area, because we also don't think Musso is going to be ready immediately to take on a role in which, if you're the regista, you have to guide Milan to a 20th Scudetto at his age with his kind of flaws. Like, remember, he was suspended for the first match because of his recklessness for a team in Valencia that was about to be relegated. So, making those kind of mistakes show that naivety of his, and we know Pioli doesn't trust youngsters. So it's scary, on top of the fact that we don't beat Inter. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Pulisic. It's almost like that Chelsea curse was lifted off him, right? The mess that is Chelsea. He's looked really good. He almost scored a third goal this season against Roma. But Patricio actually made a good save for once this
only
year.
one, yeah.
About the only one he's made. Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see what those guys can do, because Giroud's not going to be able to carry the load at that age for 3 competitions, and they're going to need to work in Okafor and the guy they signed.
Luka Jovic, yeah. Luka Jovic of famed Real Madrid transfers. Yeah, I mean, that's just, and that was a last ditch move too, because that really wasn't the priority that they wanted. They wanted Taremi. And then even the 2 guys that Inter had, those were also the linked players at the start of the window. Arnautovic more so with Maldini before the Maldini sack, and that was part of why, because that was supposed to be the backup, at least Arnautovic is number 3 at Inter. But yeah, I mean, it's just that you worry about the makeshift attack because the injuries are happening already. And Okafor, again, I'm not sure, go on a tangent here, he's not a true number 9. So he's kind of this center forward left wing type. So you're kind of asking the play style to be a little bit different too when he comes on. And he's not a prolific goal scorer by any means. So there's just too many question marks despite the talent. So yeah.
Yeah, and sorry to both of you being Jets fans. I can only imagine what it was like being hyped since like July, and then having that happen.
That's what it was like. It was devastating.
You can't like poke a hole in the 53-man roster for the first time in my life, and then the one position that matters more than any was. I'm sorry. It's just you have to vent. Alex will know this.
I mean, seeing the number 8 on your wall is really killing me right now.
Yeah, it's killing me for another reason, because that's a Tonali kit. So that's not even the Rodgers one. And he's already hurt, so he's gonna miss the Champions League stuff. But go ahead.
Yeah, so Martino mentioned striker. Striker was an interesting one in the summer for Inter as well. Gianluca Scamacca linked with both our clubs, Roma and Inter, ended up going to Atalanta. That it looked like Inter had him locked up, then to turn into Arnautovic as a backup option after a few other names didn't pan out. But Davide Fratesi, hero for Italy yesterday. I mean, how has he fit in, do you think, so far? And then obviously Thuram, you mentioned. So how's it going there? And how's Sommer looked in terms of filling in for a guy like Onana, who was outstanding last year for Inter?
Okay, so let's do it from the top, all 4 levels of the team. In terms of the strikers, like it really, Inzaghi is not, at least early on in the season, he hasn't been in favor of too much rotation, right? We've seen cameos from Arnautovic. Obviously, the debut back at San Siro for him was wonderful. A 20-minute cameo where he did really well. But outside of that, it's been the Lautaro and Thuram show. And I think a lot of Interisti going into this season probably on paper felt like we had downgraded at the attack, right? And, this stuff is all still to play out. But I think my main takeaway from seeing Thuram and Lautaro together is that Thuram's style of play, he's very unselfish and he needs to improve his finishing, but he's allowing Lautaro to thrive and to really be that number 1 option. And we've seen Lautaro with that captain's armband just be sort of a different player, right? I think the Lautaro that everyone is used to is a player that does what he does in spurts, right? Lacking the consistency where he'll have 4 or 5 matches where he plays like his hair's on fire and then he won't score for the next 9. That's what we need to look forward to this season. Like, is he going to be able to find that consistency where he can be a striker that is scoring 25 to 30 goals? And I think early returns on the partnership with Thuram indicate that he can, mold into the striker that I think all the Interisti are hoping that he can be. In terms of the midfield, again, I think, we have a lot of depth, but we haven't yet tapped into it. Inzaghi loves his veterans, right? So Mkhitaryan, despite being one of the less impressive performers, I will say, from, the start of this season, it doesn't necessarily mean that Fratesi is on the verge of getting a ton more playing time. Again, same thing with Arnautovic. We've seen Fratesi in little cameos, but there's not been anything, that you can really look at and say, oh, wow, this is, he's going to be a killer once he gets into the lineup, outside of the performance that he just had for Italy this week. I don't believe we'll see him from the start on Saturday. I think Inzaghi is still going to roll with Mkhitaryan, the veteran, because it's a really tough spot to put a kid in, to ask him to, play this Milan derby when he hasn't had a ton of game time with Barella and Hakan. Fingers crossed the whole midfield can get there. In terms of the goalkeeper, Jan Sommer, what I've noticed is that he has attempted some of the distance passing that we've seen from Onana, but it hasn't come off with the same success rate, which I think Interisti were prepared for, right? He is not Onana. I don't think many goalkeepers are with the ball at their feet. But it's tough to give a grade on Sommer, right? Because we haven't been giving up too many chances. I think the biggest save that he's made so far has been against Cagliari in the dying seconds, where he made a nice save diving to his left. But outside of that, the rest of the stuff was standard against Fiorentina. He is the shortest goalkeeper in Serie A, so it's going to be interesting to see if, some of the big boys on Milan. It's a very big physical team this year, with Chow, with Loftus-Cheek. If Giroud is able to play, there's a lot of big guys in there that can get on the end of some crosses, whether it be from a dead ball or, whether it be them pushing up the field. So it will be interesting to see if Sommer is tested in the air, given sort of his physical deficiencies compared to some of the players that he'll be facing on Saturday. It's, like I said, the big signing, Marcus Thuram, has performed very well. The rest of the signings, they haven't had the game time yet. So we'll see how things play out there.
Yeah, still early, just 3 matches, and I mean, from what I've seen from Fratesi, I wanted him at Roma real bad, I was very disappointed they didn't make that happen. So I expect him to be a player for Inter this year. I expect him to be, protagonist as the year goes on. Heading into the matchup, any reasons for concern from what you guys have seen from your sides? I know Inter, from what I've seen, their full squad pretty much is available. Milan's going to be without Tomori because he was suspended for getting the double yellow against Roma. So there's your gift from Roma for Inter fans. Kalulu and Giroud are both doubtful. I know, though, Martino, we were talking before, they're going to have some fitness checks, but anything concerning for you guys heading into this one?
I mean, I don't think Alex should have any concerns, but I'm not going to speak for him. I mean, the stat came out today. We haven't scored on Inter in over 380 days or something like that. Listen, I kind of throw the Supercopa out of the window. That was like the most disastrous stretch of Milan I think I've ever seen. And that includes, some of the Banta era teams, but we were giving up record amounts of goals at that point in the season. Yeah, I'm concerned because we don't have a great defense, and this is a side that consistently feasts on us. I thought Inter's attack was a little bit weaker in general last season. That was more of a fitness thing, not as much quality. Thuram, like Alex was saying again, physically imposing, creating a lot, attacking well. I mean, I saw his finishing is still, I don't want to say abysmal, but at times you're like, what the hell is that? And God forbid, I guess, if Inter go through a stretch where Lautaro goes cold and then you have Thuram. But the fact is, they're going to create so many chances. And Kalulu, relatively shorter than most center backs. I mean, if Kier gets in there, he's obviously too slow at this point after the ACL. Milan like to be more of a higher press. Chow, I'm not as worried about, but he's still 21. It's a big moment. Yeah, centrally, honestly, like how does Krunic combat Inter with that? It's different because it's not a double pivot without Benacer in the second leg, but it's still not a high quality player. He's got to do the bare minimum in terms of winning duels and intercepting the ball and not pushing up too high up the pitch. He's not going to be a protagonist offensively. So they're going to have to rely on Reinders and Loftus-Cheek in that matter. But with the way Inter fielded with a 3-5-2, it's going to be very hard because I think if Inter control the midfield, I don't see how Milan win this. I think it's a grave concern. But again, it's a revamped Milan attack. But as far as negatives go, that's my cause for concern. And I know some people, some Inter fans think no Tomori is actually a negative for them as opposed to him starting. So, I mean, it's true though. You see the recklessness. It's inconsistent. It's very Jekyll or Hyde. If Tomori's on his game, he's winning Man of the Match awards against Spurs in the Champions League. Regardless if Spurs suck, it's still the Champions League. Or he gets a double yellow against Roma when he was playing stupid the entire match on Belotti. Like, there's no reason to touch him, even if he's embellishing a little bit. It's just really poor. The level and standard that they need to reach to win number 20 isn't there right now. And that was my major concern prior to the year. And it's showing. So,
yeah, in terms of, just fitness concerns for Inter, again, fingers crossed, because the South Americans still need to get on that plane and head over to Milano. We'll see, if everyone comes back fit. But it's really match fitness from our depth guys as opposed to confirmed outs, right? You have Acerbi that hasn't played yet this season. He's been cleared to play, but he doesn't have the match fitness. So you're looking at, if De Vrij isn't able to complete the 90 minutes, is that going to be a concern for Inter? Cuadrado picked up a little bit of a knock for Colombia this international break. Again, we've been going to Cuadrado late in the games, making that change for Dumfries around the 65th, 70th minute. So let's see if plans change there. And then, of course, up top with Alexis, diagnosed with anemia this international break. We haven't gone to our fourth striker yet. But again, you like to have all your options available. You don't know what his status is going to be. It's likely that he's called up, given that he did. I believe he appeared in the second match. Yes, he did in the second match for Chile in this international break. So, everyone should be called up. It's less of a concern from the perspective of, are we going to be able to roll out the starting 11 that we've been going with? But more so, if there are situations where we need to look towards the bench for our depth, there might be some fitness concerns there that we'll have to see, how Inzaghi addresses. But the squad depth itself overall, we have what feels like 1-for-1s at every single position. So we'll see if that becomes a factor on Saturday.
Okay. So Martino mentioned about 380 minutes since Milan last scored on Inter, and it's Inter swept both matches last season. They won 4 of 5 by clean sheet in all competitions against Milan over the course of the last couple seasons. Coppa Italia mixed in there and everything else. So because probably mainly because of that, the lines in this one, Inter, the pretty heavy favorite at plus 110, Milan's plus 220. The draw line right now is at plus 255. Last check just a couple of minutes ago. Both teams' the score is minus 145, and the over 2.5 is at minus 115. The under at minus 105. I think that number is pretty close because it depends a lot on if Milan can crack this Inter defense. So, what's made Inter so dominant in the last handful of head-to-head matches for these sides?
Well, it's interesting because, that first meeting last season, I thought we looked the worst that we had looked the whole reign of Simone Inzaghi. What I think has been the clear advantage that Inter has had over Milan very recently is that in terms of in tactical terms, we have a lot of consistency with the starting 11 that we roll out there, with the kind of tactics that we've been playing. So we know the game that we're trying to play, as opposed to, I think, what we've seen from Milan and Pioli is there has been a lot of switching things up, whether it be tactically, whether it be with the formation, whether it be out of necessity because of injury. They haven't had the same consistency, right? It's not like we've seen the same starting 11s go at each other, 5 times last year. There's been changes, a lot of changes, but it hurts Inter less because the system never changes, right? The players might change, the individual characteristics, there might be simple tweaks, but the system is the same. And I don't think that you've been able to say that for Milan, right? During the stretches that they had last season where things were poor, I mean, Martino, how many different formations did we see? 4-3-3, 4-2-3-1, 3-5-2.
It was like makeshift 4-3-3. Even in the derby in Serie A, it was just to not concede because Tatarusanu was in there. I mean, you're not having
right.
Say what you want about Magnan. I think he's at least the top 3 goalkeeper in the world. Not having somebody like that, regardless of how the game's going against Inter, those are crucial saves. I think Tatarusanu actually played well in that one, but there was no Rafael Leao starting. That was like the point in where you're kind of trying to understand why Pioli still had a job at one point in time, because regardless of how the match goes, you had Divock Origi up top solo, who also was inconsistent, not really playing as much. That team that they had in the Supercopa was absolutely disastrous. Benacer gets injured. I mean, that's the main point. It's just so much inconsistency on top of just being overmatched. I mean, just the technical ability and quality of Inter's player. Milan are very good in terms of physicality to match with Inter. I don't think that's ever been really a discussion since they kind of since Conte left, I would say that. Because Lukaku at that point was bullying Romagnoli and Kjaer, and then Milan's like, okay, we need guys who are athletic. So with that, it's just no offensive players. I'm sorry. Like, I know people went at Rafael Leao for his performances in the semifinal. He's coming back from an injury, for one. And two, it's no disrespect to Inter's defense, but you know how easy it is when you're holding like a 2-goal lead and Leao comes back and he's the only threat? Like, who else are you worrying about in that instance? Giroud's playing every 3 to 4 days. He's supposed to be pressing up and like doing a lot in terms of that. He's not going to be capable of doing that. The service through the right side is abysmal. You lost your best creative midfielder in Benacer. Like, it's just, there wasn't enough talent around there to make up for that on top of being down 2-0. It's just embarrassing because that's the story of it. Milan have not scored. Forget about stopping Inter. You can't even get a goal. But the fascinating part is that Milan have kind of played Inter well since Inzaghi arrived in Serie A. That's the one thing. They've been kind of splitting points and wins and even draws at instances. Like, Milan didn't lose to Inter the year they won the Scudetto. The same went for last year. They split in Serie A, but obviously the Supercoppa and Champions League overshadow everything. But when it has been within Serie A, they've kind of bridged the gap a little bit. But I mean, the big question mark is these attackers. Like, what are they going to be? Is Pulisic going to be able to do what he's done against these teams, against Inter? And if he plays to somewhat that level, then we might be looking at an entirely different match. So I guess that's the next topic. I don't want to take that in because
I mean, you can go, and I was going to ask you, and thanks for correcting that, because I forgot they played so many times last year that they split the Serie A. It was the Champions League where they shut him out both legs. They clean sheet themselves. Actually, 4 straight matches clean sheet and 4 out of 5 on the season. So lot of minutes. So on that topic, what do you think this Milan, especially if Giroud doesn't play, what does this Milan have to do to break down an Inter defense that has yet to concede this season?
I think it starts with the press too, because if you're going to have a dynamic player like Okafor, it sets the tone coming out right at them, because there's a mentality difference as well at times. We saw them kind of have that adversity when they came back in that one match, 2-1, where Giroud scored a couple of times. But that was kind of, I'm not saying it's a miracle. It's just it's really hard to repeat what he did, scoring twice in like 5-6 minutes. So just to have that continued pressure, to know that you don't have to force the ball to one side of the field. The right side of the pitch for Milan has been just as effective with Loftus-Cheek and Christian as well. So just to have that, and then the depth, as you mentioned, Alex is talking about Cuadrado cameos for 20 minutes is phenomenal at his age at the right wing back spot. Milan have Chukwueze that they could bring off the bench. That's someone that's been dynamic, that has produced in the Champions League. Like we were bringing off Alexis Salamakers. One of the statistics I've been telling people was that his Serie A goal scoring record in a singular season is 2 goals. A right winger for AC Milan. That's his record. Pulisic did it in 2 matches. So like that's the level we're talking about. And no disrespect, Steve, to Roma. Everyone was saying this is the first big test for Milan and what they're able to do. We haven't lost to Roma in years. This is the big test.
True.
This is everything. It's the team that's beaten you 4 straight times. You can't score on them. They've had your number. Yeah, you won the Scudetto one time. But like largely outside of that, Inter have had our number the past, I don't know, ever since the Banta era started. It hasn't really been kind to Milan. So there's just a lot of that. I just personally want to see, when things used to be like derbies were unpredictable. Because of the intensity that could get brought into any given match. Hasn't been like that. You can tell like the energy level with Inter is just different. That's the difference. I think the best chance is goals here, bets wise, by the way. I don't know if you want me to mention that, because over 2.5, I think at -115 is kind of not a steal, I would say. I just think that's a really good number for 2.5, which, if we talk about Milan's defense being shaky, and these 2 attacks, I think, are the second and third best attack. You throw Napoli's in there in the league. I think at this point, like, you're going to see a ton of opportunities because it's really impressive on both sides, in my opinion, what I've seen so far.
Yeah, we can jump ahead to the betting angle since we're on it. The over number, I think if Milan gets a goal, I think that over 2.5 is probably really in play.
Because they're not
Right. I mean,
holding that. Yeah.
yeah, because if both teams score, I think you probably get a third based on the way these teams have been scoring goals this year. Um, Alex, anything jump out at you in terms of like when you see what Vegas is listing this game? Does it worry you at all that Inter's such a big favorite heading into a derby?
No, I don't think it's worrisome because I actually think, when it comes to soccer lines, Vegas does sort of have these lopsided odds that aren't always reflective of the competitiveness of the game. In terms I think both teams to score is a good bet, even though, it's a good size favorite, but I'd also go the over for a couple different reasons. I think one, changes in Milan's defense, right? Anytime there's changes in defense, especially if it's the first time those guys are going to be rolling out together this year. I don't know, Kjaer and Chow don't have a lot of time together, right? So maybe that would be fine to trot out against a lower level team, right? But when you're doing it against Lautaro and Thuram, I think it's reasonable to expect the informed strike partnership to be able to find a way to take advantage. But also, I really do believe that this is probably the best Milan front three that I've seen in a long time, right? If you think about with Leao, Darmian we've done a good enough job being able to contain him. But now Darmian's a year older, right? We've played a lot against Leao and we understand Leao, but you can't account for father time. And Pavard is unlikely to play given that, he hasn't been training a lot with the team, and to throw him in there for a derby is not something that I can see Simone doing. In terms of the striker, right? I think a lot of Milanisti are probably nervous that Giroud is not going to be in there. Giroud is the perfect striker for a guy like Stefan de Vrij, who's likely to start. He's the perfect striker to match up with him because they're both physical, and de Vrij has been in great form. The striker that de Vrij doesn't want to see is Okafor, a player who's going to be a little shifty, a little bit quicker, and who can get around you, right? Those big burly center backs don't want to see those little guys flying around and making them work all game. So I think that, while Milanisti are going to be nervous to not have their top goal scorer, Okafor is the player that de Vrij does not want to play against. He's not that number 9 that he can mark the whole game. And then Pulisic is not a player that Bastoni has seen before, right? Bastoni defensively this year has been great, but he's not seen Pulisic before, right? Pulisic has enough quality to give Bastoni problems. So if you just look at both back lines and the challenges that they're going to have, you have Milan, which is the challenge of containing one of the better strike partnerships in the league, and then you have Inter, which is the challenge of going up against a strike force that is much quicker than they are. So I think it's fair to say that over on the goals is a pretty solid bet.
Yeah, Scotty, I'll bring you in too here on the betting side. What are you noticing? Anything in the lines that jumps out at you?
Well, yeah, I mean, I was getting a little bit ahead and looking at some of like the props. I was looking at goal score props specifically.
I just pulled those up too. If you want to read some of those out, they're big.
Start looking at some of the numbers at Milan. Leao I think is sitting at like plus 270. I think I saw Pulisic was sitting around plus 330, and then Okafor at plus 350 is like the real eyebrow. So if you find out that Giroud is not going to be playing and Okafor is getting the start in this one, I could easily see throwing a little bit on him and maybe Leao, and just hoping that there's either, like Martino said, a press that creates an error that leads to a bit of a break, and maybe the speed and athleticism of Leao and Okafor can kind of catch Inter out. Or maybe you see an issue where Dumfries gets, placed a little bit farther forward and Leao can get out on a break and, feed Okafor or play up that partnership. So I think playing off of one or even both of those guys, even if you get one hit there, you're going to still turn out a profit. And if you get lucky and they both hit, it's a big one. But that's kind of where I was looking initially. I know you guys are all on goals, just on the trend of how Inter have been, playing the derby and how they've been playing the season with their clean sheets. Inter to keep a clean sheet, not even win, but just to keep a clean sheet is plus 200. So if you think history repeats itself and maybe you are a big Giroud believer and then you're not a fan of how Milan is going to, handle Inter without him, plus 200 on Inter to keep a clean sheet, considering the history and the form that they're in right now is a pretty good one.
Yeah. The goal scorer numbers jumped out at me. Even for Inter, like Thuram is plus 240. I mean, Lautaro's the closest to even at plus 140, but Thuram jumps out at plus 240. I mean, or now to
Wow,
plus 250 if he gets
where's he
minutes.
coming in at plus 240? That's crazy.
I've got him on DraftKings here. It's plus 240 Thuram.
That's insane. For any
Yeah.
time?
Yep. Anytime goal scorer. And even
That's
Mkhitaryan
incredible.
and Çalhanoğlu, who can score from the midfield, plus
penalty.
300. Yeah,
And
penalty.
yeah, well, yeah, that's the thing too with like penalty takers. Even if you think this match is sort of chippy in that sense, or it could get to that, that's happened plenty of times. There's been penalties in this matchup. Çalhanoğlu, I think that's somebody that's going to get the penalty in this one. I think he's taken them well against Milan. For someone who's, I would say he's more of an emotional player. Like it's an emotional match for him, compared to most players. But Thuram, just for comparison with FanDuel really quick to show how good that is, he's plus 125. He's the main favorite of the anytime goal scorers. So if you just comparatively look at these markets, I know we talk about it all the time. And Scotty, this is something that we always see it. Like Chaka Traore, right? Plus 280 goal scorer. It's not even to be disrespectful. Does anyone in here know who that is?
Who?
Exactly.
There's too many Traores for me to keep track of, if we're being honest.
That's exactly. Yeah, well, that too. But he's a Primavera kid who's never debuted. And so, well, actually, he had his debut with Parma when he was 16. He was playing with the Primavera last year. These are the types of players that have higher odds than like Milan, like the top players. And they're in here. Like Teo Hernandez is plus 700. I know he doesn't really score and get that forward against Inter, but again, he's also like, if Giroud's not playing, Teo's usually the designated penalty taker. So that's just kind of an angle.
Ask you who's next. Yeah,
exactly. So Teo is that player. So you could see that. I know Pulisic takes them well. I don't see him supplanting a veteran and a player like Teo and doing that. I wouldn't be completely stunned, but it's kind of stuff like that you look at and you're kind of like, I don't understand where this comes from. And then Lautaro, I think, is plus 145 here. I mean, the dude scores all the time. I mean, at this point, it's kind of naive not to bet him. And I know how difficult it is to score in this sport, but if he's constantly doing it, you just take it. It's at plus money. And again, I know, Alex, I'm not really sure. Like at times I see him take penalties. Would this even be one that he actually like?
Hakan is Inzaghi has said that Hakan is a designated penalty kick taker, but again, you don't know game situation where substitution can happen and so forth, and you end up with Lautaro. I don't know the odds if you guys want to help me out here, but just looking at matchups, Loftus-Cheek and Mkhitaryan playing on the same side of the midfield. Mkhitaryan loves to join the attack, and if there's an opportunity for RLC to sort of catch him out with his athleticism and burst up the field, you might have an opportunity there. And then on the other side of the midfield, Tijani playing in his first Milan derby against Barella, who's yet to get his name on the score sheet, and we know how important he is for Inter. I think both of those shouts from midfield, depending on what the odds are, I don't know what they are. If someone wants to help me out, but
they're big.
Yeah, sorry, you can go first with your. They're probably
on DraftKings. Barella's plus 350 and Loftus-Cheek is plus 500.
Yeah, so at some point, Barella has to start joining the goals. And then I just really like the matchup for RLC against. I don't like the matchup, but I think it's a good matchup for him against Mkhitaryan.
Barella's plus 410 on FanDuel, so it's a little bit better there. Well, like a good amount better. Also, like I guess. It depends on some books as well. I know, what is it? Today's Wednesday. Usually closer to the match, then they start offering assists or anytime goal scorer or assister on some of these books. So even if you want to wait out on some of that stuff, Barella's just insane. DiMarco, like I don't. Yeah. Okay. So no, you go for it. Yeah.
I was just gonna know. You brought up DiMarco's name. I was looking down the list, and he's plus. I just lost him. I think he was around plus 700 or so. Anytime
for goal scorer,
plus 550. So if you figure goal or assist, because he's a guy who's gonna be swinging in crosses from the left, you might get him at a decent number goal or assist when those props that you mentioned start coming out. That's someone I would take a look at. I didn't get to watch the Italy match yesterday. Nick told me he looked pretty good.
Outside the one error. Yeah.
He also, outside of Thuram and Lautaro, the next highest shot taker on the team is DiMarco with 7, 1 behind Thuram.
Yeah, and I think he would take probably any like left-footed favored free kicks probably too at this point, right?
Yep.
He's insane. He's an insane. So he's 600 on FanDuel. So again, that's like a different boost. There, some of these are similar, but it's so weird how they come to these conclusions though. Like if Loftus-Cheek is the same number at that, but then they have DiMarco, what would you say was +5 on
550.
DK? 550, another 50 there. It's a +600. Like I know they have the algorithm, like Davi Klaassen is like ahead of Samuel Chukwueze in this, like Luca Romero, like these guys just don't get minutes. I don't see. Maybe even, okay, how about this one? Just a shot. Maybe if it gets a clip, this is just a shot in the dark. Like Chow, Alex talks about like the physical prowess of some of these Milan players and how dangerous they could be in the air. This guy's a freak in terms of athleticism. Sometimes his finishing is a little shaky, but +1500 off of a corner. It's not ridiculous. It's a pretty damn massive number. I'm trying not to curse. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, I would throw De Vrij in the same category in terms of like how they could find their way on the score sheet. It would be similar depending on what his odds are, but I would assume it'd be around the same thing.
Plus
they're both
12,
plus 1400 on DraftKings for De Vrij.
Oh, and then sorry, I was gonna say one more bet because I didn't want to forget it.
Go ahead, Martino. You go first.
It's opposite of you, Scotty. I'm very sorry, but if in the event that we do think there's tons of goals in it, Inter and both to score is +300. So like I wouldn't take, Inter at +110 at that point, because if I just think if these goals are gonna pop up, it's just you might as well take 3. Milan are gonna go 5. Like I know it's kind of like stupid to think like this sometimes, but it's like, are Milan really gonna go 5 straight derbies without scoring? Like that's kind of what we're looking at. I don't know when the last time that ever happened or if it did. So you're kind of like, oh,
it's never happened.
Okay, so we basically need something to never happen to like kind of lose that bet. That's just kind of how I like look at it. I know I worded that weirdly, but
no, but I think we're actually kind of close, because if you told me I can get one pick on this game, I would have taken Inter in the over 1.5 parlay. It's +165.
That's still good.
That's great, right? Because like you said, even if Milan are getting a goal, you're going to be covered there, and if they don't, and Inter gets a 2-0 win, like you're just getting that extra juice on it. So if I'm taking one pick, that's probably the one I feel best about in terms of value and probability of occurring. But I also don't hate doing it with both teams to score, because I agree. I think that seems, like you said, it seems like it's a matter of time for it to happen.
Yeah, and even the team totals, I just looked at them now for the first time. Milan over 1.5 is +175. Inter over 1.5 is +105. So even if you think there might be like one of those early season matches last year where it was a 3-2 win for Milan, both teams scoring 2 goals, or you take one of those, you might get it too without a team even winning a match.
Yeah. Also, there was another stat which Milan haven't scored their first goal in the derby in quite some time. I forget the length of it, but it has not been within the past 5 matchups at least. So again, Inter first team to score, it's kind of juiced. It's -145. So maybe if you think Milan come out firing, like, I mean, you could play devil's advocate with it, but like -145 is a pretty confident line, I think, in thinking Inter's going to get off on the right foot. So, I mean, just kind of those things I look at too. It's kind of hard, like a few days out. I usually do Saturday morning. Well, this Saturday morning, I'll probably do it just because, I mean, you saw what happened with the Jets. That's why I try not to do that stuff.
Be a rough. Well, at least one of you, well, potentially, one of you will feel a little bit better after Saturday, unless there's like a 0-0 draw or something, which we're not expecting. But any closing thoughts from you guys on this match heading into it, or you think we covered all the main things that you have to see from your perspective on your side of the San Siro?
Yeah, I guess, for me, I think the expectation going into the season was that both of these teams would challenge for the title. And I'm happy to see that is the case, because I can't think of a more compelling storyline for Serie A than Milan and Inter fighting for this thing all season long to the very end, just like it was 2 years ago. But now you're taking that and you're adding, the ability to add a second star to the jersey onto it. So, I'm hoping for a great game. Like Martino said, like you want the derbies to feel big. And it's, they felt big for me. I'll say that the past few have felt big for me. So I'm excited for the game. I think it's okay to say that Inter are the favorite you have a team that just went to a Champions League final, and it doesn't look like they've lost the step. And you have a lot of new things going on at Milan. So I don't think it's crazy to say that Inter are the favorite, but I'm looking forward to a good game, and hopefully we can continue our streak here to start the season.
Yeah, I just want to say something for the futures market, kind of like a final thing. Inter's plus 155 right now. They were kind of like plus 175 prior to the season. I think they clearly look like the best team. I think Milan's been close behind them. Napoli's question marks have been quite valid at this point. Just that match against Lazio, no disrespect. We saw Milan beat Napoli 4-0. That was worse, in my opinion. That was really a bloodbath. And again, if they lose Osimhen January with AFCON, it's a huge dent for them. And my point is, if Inter win this, I think that moves significantly because Napoli is fourth in the odds right now, and they're plus 430. To fall behind Juve by that much because Juve is plus 380, Milan's at plus 300. I mean, that's pretty substantial. I think the only thing in terms of like, if you're an Inter lover in terms of future bets, probably now, again, if you do it in season. I know it's very long. It's just the fourth match, but you probably maybe want to get in on it now because Inter, like, this is a surefire thing that they could do this, that win number 20.
Last call.
Think that it's, and Milan, again, say they look kind of poor. They don't look on Inter's level. Even if the scoreline doesn't reflect that, the bookies aren't going to like say, oh, Milan might be able to get, like, they're going to go with Inter. So like that, I think that'll change significantly. And these are public books too. So even offshore stuff, I'm sure Inter's going to get in the minus 120, 130 area very soon. So, but as far as Milan goes, I'll take a draw. I want to win, but I'd be okay with the draw if it came to that because when you lose 4 straight like this, you don't have much confidence heading into these matches. So yeah.
Right. So great stuff from you guys. I mean, I think our listeners will be well prepared for this matchup on Saturday. It's going to be a good one, noon Eastern here stateside. So before we let you guys go, just let everybody know where they can find you, Alex.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Alex Raffa, Raffa, or interviews _P0D with myself and my co-host Johnny Paterno at Sauce GMP.
All right, Martino.
Yeah, you could just follow me at Martino Puccio everywhere. Been doing a lot more Milan work. And then obviously on the betting side of things, I mean, if you want to go back to watch that Serie A preview with Nick, see if him or I have any bad takes, go for it. But obviously all the stuff that I do with The Athletic as well, previewing the Champions League or whatever gambling stuff, I kind of get my choice. So I got away with getting a Serie A article to preview for the season. I was very fortunate. And then your preview as well, guys, was awesome for all the stuff that you do on YouTube as well. So I'm glad it's on there instead of seeing the clips from time to time, because Twitter is awful now with seeing like who you follow and their tweets. I never like see half the people that I want to see now. So but yeah, check all that stuff out. Appreciate the support from you guys as always. And it's always a lot of fun to be on here. And Scotty and you guys have been on fire. Where'd you guys go last season? It was something like stupid, right?
Yeah, we started off like we were up like 35 units, and then we kind of treaded water from the post World Cup break. But we're hoping the World Cup break this year we continue that momentum through the season.
It's the most bizarre year. You can't go off of anything.
Yeah, it was tough.
To that, yeah.
Yeah, so thanks everybody for listening. Give these guys a follow, give their work a follow. They do a lot of great stuff. And we'll catch you guys again next week.